It's been a while since we've done one of these, so we've got a lot of ground to cover, and as such, I'm going to split this into 3 parts. Part 1, where we are. Let's not beat around the bush too much. AirlineSim in 2024 looks and feels quite dated. There are many things that need fixing, both in terms of design and technology. And despite this, AirlineSim development has been on the back burner for several years, for reasons that we'll get to later. This combined with a general shift away from classic browser-based games means that AirlineSim's player base has been in a slow but steady decline for a long time now. Our data also gives reason to believe that the recent decline was amplified by general economic effects. It's a bit of a first in our history. Especially in Germany, one of the most important markets for AirlineSim, we've seen negative impact from the general economic situation right now. But we went live on Steam this year, and while it was not a massive success, the initial and ongoing influx from Steam has more than stopped our decline in active users. And at the moment, around 50% of all new players are coming through Steam. And I mean, this sounds abstract. So just to give you an idea what this means, the overall amount of active players oscillates around 2,000 unique weekly players at the moment, and that's up from 1,800-ish last year. This sounds tiny, and it is, but for a niche game like ours, this is actually quite impressive, especially given how long AirlineSim has been around. It's also worth mentioning AirlineSim has been able to maintain a very positive rating on Steam. So in its niche, we seem to be doing something right. And it's sort of the first time that we're actually seeing a condensed rating for AirlineSim. This is something that hasn't really existed before. So this is great to see and a great confirmation. That said, it's safe to assume that we are losing out on a lot of potential players by just how hard AirlineSim is to get into. And I mean, there's a total lack of a tutorial. We have an incredibly dusty user interface design, and the general user experience that it's just not what people expect from a game in 2024 anymore, right? So the Steam release really drove home this point. But let's talk about other things. It might be surprising to hear that I work 100% of my time on AirlineSim right now. Great, right? In part 2 and 3 of this video, I'll touch on why this is unusual, and why there's a bit of a catch. But as a consequence, almost every week of 2024 has seen some progress on AirlineSim, and testament to this is my development logbook that I'm keeping on the forums or maintaining on the forums. And I've managed to continuously update this since the end of January. So yeah, link in the description below. See me become a YouTuber right here. And in this development log, I try to provide regular insights into what's happening. And I mean, the focus of this whole thing is about on technical issues, of course, or technical topics. But I also want to highlight how many other things need to happen in any given week to keep the project and the company going, even if those things don't make for the most interesting read. And I can't help myself to kind of maybe go overboard with the technical details every now and then. Yeah, it's just to kind of to kind of bring across that things are happening, right? And there's a lot of things happening, not always something that people can see, but things are happening and things are developing. And I'm not sure whether I should attribute this to what I've just said or the things I said before, or the Steam release, or maybe both. But we've seen a bit of a community revival, sort of. We have a lot more activity on Discord. We have more activity on the forums. And as said, with the development logs, I want to bring across that AirlineSim is alive and kicking. And I mean, it fills me with joy, really, and I'm going to touch on that later on as well, that the community response seems to confirm this, right? It's a niche game, it's a small game, but there is a community around it, and that's beautiful. So to sum things up, where are we? While things are certainly less grim than, say, this time around in 2023, there is a generally positive outlook. And AirlineSim's current state obviously is far from ideal, and it leaves a lot of room for improvement. And I'm not here to sugarcoat or even deny this, but I feel like I need to provide some context, which brings us to part 2, how we got here. To understand the current state of things, we need to go back in time. And in fact, we need to go quite far back in time, basically back to the point at which AirlineSim became a commercial project and hence simulogics a business. So around 2007-ish. Back then, it was completely unfeasible to live off of AirlineSim alone. Like, we were already 2 people back then who needed an income. So basically, out of necessity, we basically did freelance work from day one, meaning at no point in simulogics history were we able to dedicate 100% of our time and resources to our games. Like, there had always been a freelance software development component to it. I mean, as AirlineSim grew, that freelance work faded into the background a little bit, except for one important client. So we didn't take on new clients. We just stuck with the one we had. But fast forward to around 2015. I mean, I've always had this idea that simulogics as a business should not be relying on a single title to keep it afloat. So I always wanted to start another game to kind of reduce this reliance, right? I just never managed to get it off the ground, like with the given resources and everything. That just never worked out, until by pure chance I met Mihi, to whom I pitched the idea of Prosperous Universe. I mean, you might have heard of that title if you're reading the devlogs or check out the simulogics website or anything. Then you've probably stumbled across this game before. And shortly after we met, we sat together in my small office, and there we were, writing up the first game design documents, and bouncing back and forth ideas for what would become simulogics' second title. The problem, obviously, or not so obviously, depends. At this point, nothing about the general financial situation of the company had changed, right? We still had the same income from AirlineSim. We had the same income from freelance work, but now suddenly we had another team member. So to finance the development of Prosperous Universe, I became even more reliant on my freelance work. And even though I ended up only working 50% of my time for this one remaining client that I mentioned before, I essentially grew into their development lead, meaning I was building up and managing a team of roughly half a dozen developers, and I was doing all of that next to running my own company, my own games. And anyone who can add up 1 and 1 and 1, see what I did there, can see that this is when the trouble for AirlineSim really began. Because, I mean, from that point on, the latest, resources were spread between 2 in-house projects, 1 external project, and then, of course, there's still the whole overhead of running the company as such. So effectively, AirlineSim at that point went into maintenance mode. Like, I mean, that was sort of the dark age of AirlineSim, as I would call it, because as you'll see, like for another 5 years or so, we really didn't get anything big out of the door, which is a sad fact. But here we are. Then, as another milestone, so to speak, the German government started a generous funding scheme for game development in 2019, I think it was. And we felt that we had to participate because this funding scheme, it's pretty simple. You pitch a project, you calculate how much this project is going to cost you. Then you pitch in 50% of the price of that project cost, and the government takes over the other half. And then I think back then when we did the first funding project, it was still 70% that came from the government, only 30% from us. So this presented a huge chance to realize things that we simply weren't able to do at our limited size back then, and without having external investors. So consequently, we would have been stupid not to take this opportunity. It had massive potential, right? And it did, in fact, allow us to expand our team. I mean, at some point we were 6 people, I think, at Simulogics, and we decided to really double down on the development of Prosperous Universe. Maybe just for context, you have to see that. I mean, that was our new title back then, and we were sort of betting on that new title, and it being a newer thing, having the potential of being more successful, or at least reaching the level of AirlineSim a lot quicker than the amount of time that AirlineSim took to reach the same level. Get the idea? So that was kind of our thinking back then. And for example, that allowed us for the first time ever to have a dedicated front-end developer, or a front-end designer rather, on the team, who was in charge for the mobile UI of Prosperous Universe. And the Prosperous Universe website as well. But it also meant that my own time was increasingly tied up in management tasks. Despite all effort, Prosperous Universe, sadly, never really took that trajectory I just described. And that meant that the company continued to be on life support from my, at that point, quite extensive freelance work. I mean, I've described before, I've basically become a team lead for a team that was quite a bit larger than my own company. And we were also depending on public funding, right? Because I mean, we get used to this influx of cash quite quickly, and for better or worse, we were kind of reliant on that money coming from funding projects, and possibly a bit too late. But in 2021, when Prosperous Universe had already been the focus of the company for several years, we saw the signs, right? And we decided, okay, you know what, we need to keep the other major source of income alive that we have, and that is AirlineSim. Because I mean, despite all of this, the revenue from AirlineSim over all these years was usually stayed rather stable, right? It's actually quite impressive, but despite it being that way, we were sure that we had to give some love to that project. Otherwise, that revenue stream might also dry up, and that would be a disaster. So we needed to plot a path forward for this title, and it had been around for 20 years at that time. And we wanted to address core issues of the current version. And we also thought, okay, you know what, if AirlineSim was that successful for 20 years already, keep in mind, AirlineSim was founded in 2002. We are around 2021 in the timeline right now. We wanted to build a foundation for another 20 years going forward, right? We're thinking long term. So consequently, we applied for and received another funding project for the so-called technology demonstrator project. I think you've probably heard about it. If not, I put the link in the description once again to give you an overview of what this was about. And I mean, this looked like a blessing at first, right? We were able to keep that income stream from government funding. We were also able to kind of invest into the future of AirlineSim, kind of lay a foundation for future stuff to come. But in fact, it quickly turned into a curse. And in 2023, it sort of all came crushing down. Not no other way to put it. Now, common sense dictates to keep personal stuff out of official communication. But given that I'm the sole developer on AirlineSim and that the project more or less lives and dies with me, I find that my personal life and that of the game are too intertwined to discuss one without the other. So here goes, personal stuff. Sorry. Roughly in the same time frame as the events described before. So between the inception of Prosperous Universe and the start of the Technology Demonstrator project, my two children were born. So we're talking about what, maybe 4 or 5 year time span here. In that time span, my family and I moved to a different town. And just as it so happens, there was a small pandemic going on. So quite a few things going on. And then towards the end of that period, my spouse got a new job in yet another town. And since we didn't want to move twice, and for a lack of better alternatives, and for reasons that would probably make like a whole story in and of itself. So if you ever happen to meet me at an AirlineSim community event, I'm happily going to talk about it. We started to build a house, as Germans do, at the new place, while keeping the center of our lives at the old one for the time being, right? So we had commuting, we had a construction project, all of that going on. So yeah, we had 2 people working full-time jobs. We had 2 kids. We were partially living in 2 different places. And on paper, we both sort of had to reach the equivalent of 40-hour work week somehow, while also running our full-blown construction project. And to make all of this work, I sort of consistently did night shifts. I worked on weekends, basically work all day, take care of the kids, have some dinner, work some more, go to bed, repeat. And to absolutely nobody's surprise, I couldn't keep up. So yeah, I barely managed to finish just enough of the technology demonstrator project to fulfill the project criteria. Remember, this is a project funded in part by the government. So we're talking about subsidies, and we're talking about criteria to be met, or requirements to be met. Otherwise, you might get in trouble because you're wasting government money here, right? So I managed to do that, but shortly after, a fuse blew. And the result was a burnout. So the classic. I was more or less incapable of doing anything for several weeks. And as bad as this sounds, I was lucky because my team, my client, my family were extremely understanding of the situation, and incredibly supportive. And I was able to scale down my work without fearing negative consequences. I was able to find a therapist pretty quickly, which isn't a given in Germany. And yeah, burnout is I tend to describe it that way. It's a physiological response to something that you're not psychologically willing or able to accept. And thinking one can handle the workload and the responsibilities that I listed earlier without getting hurt is utterly irrational, right? So it's something you trick yourself into believing, because how else would you manage it all, right? So, but your body notices until it quits, basically. And it tells you that your ways aren't sustainable, and forces you the hard way to sit down and revisit your priorities, and how you want to live, and what you're good at, what you're not good at, all that sort of stuff. And that's what I did. So maybe before I move on to part 3 of this video, maybe a bit of a public service announcement. So I just want to emphasize how integral getting help quickly was to my speedy recovery. The sooner you talk to a professional, the better. Because the longer you wait, or the longer you resist, or the longer you try to power through and sit it out, the higher the chances are that things get worse. In the worst case, you actually going to cause permanent damage. There are people who run into burnout and they basically never come out of it again and are incapable of functioning normally for the rest of their lives. So if you're affected, or if you see yourself in a similar situation, don't risk it. Get help as soon as you can, and just accept the fact. So yeah. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about what all this means for the future of AirlineSim. Part 3, where we are going. I tend to be an optimist. I see things in a positive light. And as such, I also see the positive in this burnout experience that I just described, the good that came out of it, and of course also the bad that it revealed. And obviously, I have drastically reduced my workload. I don't work on weekends anymore unless I really want to, or I enjoy the work. And I have, for the time being anyway, stopped doing any freelance work. I also have shelved all plans or ideas for growing the company, for chasing new funding projects, for seeking investments, or developing new games. All of that is kind of off the table at the moment. At the very least, until my life is stabilized, and to a point at which I don't feel like I have to fly by visual flight rules. And I'm able to make longer term plans again. So we're kind of focusing on the day-to-day. We're focusing on finishing our house. We have actually decided to move twice now because it just makes things so much easier. So we are in a new place, temporary place, and until we are moving into the house next year, at the very earliest, we're just going to take things very, very simple, very easy. So therapy did not just get me out of burnout. It also revealed a lot about myself. and about how my brain works, or rather doesn't. And so all of this now factors into how I work, what I work on, what does and what doesn't get my focus or my attention. And an obvious case in point here is, of course, AirlineSim, right? Because basically overnight, this project turned from a dreaded piece of legacy software into something that I genuinely enjoy working on again. And without external deadlines, without lofty goals for some speculative milestone, without spreading too little time across far too many projects, without arbitrary commercial goals that would force me to do things every day that I just don't enjoy doing. AirlineSim feels a lot more like the thing I was drawn to 22 years ago, right? Just working on something out of the pure joy of working on it, right? And the fact that I can work on it without hurting myself and at the same time have a healthy work-life balance again, that also helps drastically, right? And I mean, the thought of working away on this project indefinitely, it doesn't feel like a failure anymore. It feels liberating, right? But when I come across an interesting real life aspect of aviation that I like to model, I add it to the roadmap. And when some functionality is clearly missing, or I don't know. If something is missing, I don't immediately worry about that when to possibly find the time to implement it. But I add it to the roadmap. And when I think of a broken feature in AirlineSim, I still find it annoying, obviously, but I don't get frustrated or defensive about it anymore, as it would have been the case maybe a couple of years ago. I add it to the roadmap, and whenever the right time comes, I will address it, or I won't. That option exists now, and that feels very liberating, as I said before. So, because there are so many things I want to explore for AirlineSim, right? And if something else feels more beneficial or more interesting or just more fun on a given day, that's what's going to get my focus, right? I'm not going to sweat something not being ideal, because it's never going to be, right? And because of that, I sort of fell back in love with diving deep into topics in and around aviation and trying to evaluate whether or how these could be added to AirlineSim in a meaningful way. That's also sort of important. I mean, best example for this right now, from when this video was recorded, this whole aircraft performance topic that you might be aware of if you're reading development or following the development log, has been going on for several weeks now. It's a real deep dive, really trying to understand the nitty and gritty of how aircraft performance works, to kind of get the best sort of model into AirlineSim that we can realistically provide without going totally overboard in terms of data research and such. Just to provide one example of how these things sort of work these days. So instead of constantly feeling behind or dreading the thought of something not being perfect, I look at my ever-growing roadmap and I'm feeling excited for all the things that might come, and how over time all of these little bits and pieces will hopefully form a coherent whole. Like, without hard deadlines, there are no milestones, there's no spectacular releases. I mean, these things might happen. I mean, if there's a great feature that gets finished, there might be a spectacular release, but it's not the goal in and of itself. You know what I mean? So, will AirlineSim stay a niche thing for a very narrow audience? Absolutely. I mean, it's not going to change, and I don't see any reason to change that either. And if anything, I am going to double down on the fact. I mean, AirlineSim is what it is. 2010 me might have worried about missing out on some market trend or not building a game that can reach 50,000 active players. But in 2024, I'm comfortable seeing AirlineSim as my magnum opus that I'm going to keep crafting for the foreseeable future, if you will. So what does all of that mean for AirlineSim, and more importantly, what does it mean for you as a player? It should be abundantly clear that at this point, things aren't going to be moving fast, right? I mean, I'm the only person working on this. The roadmap is infinite. Things are just going to be moving at the pace that I'm able and willing to do it. This roadmap, it's long-term, it's fluid, it's very much aspirational. Like, I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to add a link to it in the description below. There is a high chance, actually, I would say it's almost a certainty that I will not manage to finish all things on this list before I retire, bite the dust, or life just takes me elsewhere. I mean, who knows the future, right? But the two main points I want to pledge myself to are one, continuous progress, and two, to actually ship stuff. Because if I have one big regret about the past of AirlineSim, is that too many times I've worked on some huge feature, but then never actually shipped it. I mean, we had, at least on 2 occasions, we had actual feature presentations in location physically with a presentation on the wall about new features to be released soon, and they just never saw the light of the day, which is sad. Like, it's frustrating and it's sad, but it sort of makes a lot of sense from today's point of view, why it went that way, right? So I want to get to a point where every few weeks or every few months, some item from the roadmap is going to hit the game. And it doesn't have to be something huge. It doesn't have to be something spectacular. It might be a smaller part of something bigger. But nonetheless, every few weeks, every few months, something should be released and become accessible in one way or another. And I mean, over the past few years, especially with due to my work for these external clients, I think I've learned a thing or two about software development, and especially about how to continuously deliver value without sort of building in the ivory tower, right? I'm going to lock myself into a room and I'm just going to code away on something. And whether it actually gets shipped is a completely different story. And I want to avoid that. Like, it's something that I don't want to do anymore. So that's, as I said before, one of my key pledges to actually ship stuff. And yeah, I'm intending to apply this knowledge to keep things going here at AirlineSim. And given the circumstances I've described before, I think I have been doing pretty well on that front in 2024. Closing words. So, where does that leave us? In my opinion, the key takeaway here is that AirlineSim not only has a future, but that it actually looks pretty great for anyone who enjoys AirlineSim right now or has ever done so. Because I mean, AirlineSim is not going anywhere. It's just going to get better, and it's going to gain more depth, and it's going to get more features that people have been dreaming about for decades at this point. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to be a better experience, continuously improving experience for players, new and old alike. And yeah, work will continue at the pace that I can and I'm willing to go, but indefinitely nonetheless. And the roadmap is laid out for anyone. I mean, not only to see, but to vote on, to comment and discuss. I mean, the voting aspect is important. I mean, seriously, please share your thoughts, contribute your knowledge, provide your feedback. Let me know what the things are that you find most interesting, because as I said, that roadmap is sort of infinite relative to my expected lifespan. So there needs to be some prioritization, right? We have to pick what gets addressed first. So please, that's your chance to influence those decisions. And nothing is more motivating and satisfying than actually seeing people enjoy and interact with your work. Like the worst thing that could happen is I release something and there's just crickets, right? No response, no one cares, nobody talks about it. That's the saddest thing that can happen. So please, I was about to say like and subscribe. I mean, you can do that too, but that's not the point of this video, right? Please head to the forums, head to Discord, keep the discussion going, check out the roadmap, vote for your favorite items, add your comments. If you are someone who works in the industry, it doesn't matter which area, because you want to cover all of them, please go ahead and kind of give us your firsthand insights about how things actually work in reality, because I really love soaking that up and kind of distilling it into AirlineSim features in the long run. So please, yeah, hit the forums, let us know, or share your knowledge. So yeah, thanks for watching this all the way to the end. Thanks for playing AirlineSim, and stay tuned for the things to come. Slow and steady.